Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have you here. And I want to talk today about anxiety in children because many kids are having their first weeks back at school. Some kids are still home learning here in Australia, so we'll have that back to school date coming. And this is a time when anxiety can be exacerbated. You know, kids have been at home for what feels like a very long time in children's lives. And so going back to school, being away from parents, and just back into that school routine, the pressures of school, the competitiveness potentially of extracurricular activities that they've had a break from over the summer and the Christmas holidays, it can be a lot for kids to deal with. And it's not just the kids that are just starting school this year for the very first time or moving to a different school or starting high school. You know, they're the ones that we typically think will have anxiety, but really this can occur in any kids. And so I wanted to chat a bit about our personal experience with anxiety in our family and, you know, some of the naturopathic principles of causes and risk factors for anxiety and some of the things that we can do, some practical solutions for anxiety. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So anxiety really is fearing what's to come. It's a multi-system response to a perceived threat or danger. And notice that word perceived. What our kids might get anxious about, we might think is nothing, but to them it's a perceived threat or danger. And anxiety can really present very differently in different people. It can affect any system in the body, which is why symptoms vary so much from person to person. Some of the more common symptoms of anxiety are a racing heartbeat, heart palpitations, sweating, breathlessness, dizziness, excess worrying, feelings of apprehension, feeling fatigued or weak, having a dry mouth, even digestive symptoms such as diarrhea or sore tummies. Disturbed sleep is a big one, difficulty relaxing. So these are some of the more common symptoms, but kids can't always articulate that they're feeling this way. And I know when my daughter first started experience anxiety, she was quite young. Well, the first time it really became obvious, we'd left home to travel around Australia for a year. And she was complaining of tummy aches. And, you know, she was getting a little bit shaky and, you know, feeling really tired. So I didn't straight away immediately know that was anxiety. So it can be pretty hard to pick up. And the level of symptoms, the severity of the symptoms can really vary, you know, can be quite mild to quite severe. So most of us experience feelings of anxiety at some point in our life. But if you or your child are feeling anxious, you know, most days or regularly, it may be classified as anxiety disorder. So I want to talk about some of the common causes and risk factors for anxiety in children. So genetics are a big one. If you have a family history of anxiety, you're more likely to develop anxiety yourself. So looking at family history can be helpful. And what I like to say about genetics is that the genes you have, you can't change, but your genetics are like a loaded gun. But there are diet and lifestyle factors that end up pulling the trigger of that loaded gun. So you can't change your genetic makeup, but nutrition and lifestyle can affect the way genes work and can effectively turn genes on and off in the body. One specific genetic factor for anxiety is something called MTHFR. I'll pop a link in the comments or in the show notes rather to an article I have about MTHFR if you haven't heard of it before. But it's a gene that plays an important role in methylation and folate metabolism, and our bodies need to convert folate to an active form. But if there's a defect or a mutation in the MTHFR gene, this conversion doesn't happen effectively. If folate conversion isn't happening, it affects the production of brain chemicals, as well as affects a whole heap of other things within the body as well. But when the balance of brain chemicals is thrown out, it can lead to anxiety and other mental health symptoms as well. So if you have a strong kind of genetic predisposition to mental health symptoms, conditions, anxiety, then finding out more and looking at MTHFR is definitely, something helpful to have a look into. It has been shown that anxious mums are more likely to have kids that develop mental health issues, including anxiety. But there's no clear evidence whether this is solely genetic or if it's a learned behaviour. So that's really interesting as well. But it can put a bit of pressure and a bit of guilt on anxious mums as well. So it's hopefully a motivator that if, as a mum, you are prone to anxiety, to get support with that, because your own anxiety could be exacerbating your child's anxiety as well. So I don't want that to come across as like, building up that guilt that mums feel way too often, but just to use it as a motivator to make sure you're getting support and addressing your anxiety. So genetics play a big part. Trauma obviously plays a big part as well. Past or current trauma can lead to anxiety in kids. That's, I think, pretty obvious. But trauma really is beyond my scope as a naturopath, which is why I recommend working with a counsellor or a psychologist to address trauma and for them to support you with whatever comes up and the strategies to deal with the anxiety symptoms that come from that. But I did want to mention that trauma is a big cause of anxiety as well. We also want to be looking at gut health in kids that are anxious or predisposed to feeling anxious regularly. So many symptoms of anxiety are related to the gut, like diarrhea, abdominal pain, nausea, those sorts of things. So there's a close link between the gut and the brain. We know that. I talk about this often. The gut is often referred to by scientists as the second brain. And they link that, they work together, they communicate, the gut and brain do, via the gut-brain axis. So we know if the gut isn't optimal, then it can affect how the nervous system and the brain work and affect those neurotransmitters that, when out of balance, can lead to things like anxiety. So dysbiosis is an imbalance of gut bacteria, and that has been linked as a potential cause of anxiety. So in one study, half the participants in the study were given a probiotic and the other half were given a common anti-anxiety medication. The probiotic group saw a similar reduction in cortisol and symptoms that were related to anxiety as the medicated group. So probiotics, according to this study, could be just effective as medications for anxiety. So that's really promising. A balanced microbiome, so, the ecosystem of bacteria that live within our gut, a healthy, good, diverse, balanced microbiome is thought to protect the nervous system, the brain, and the adrenal glands, which are all linked with anxiety. This can control the reaction to stress and reduce the response to stressful situations. So the better your gut health, the greater your protection against anxiety. So this should be empowering. This is something that we can do. We can, improve our kids' gut health. And this is something that I've talked about on other episodes of the podcast. It's something that we support clients and our Natural Super Kids Club members with. So it's something we talk about a lot because gut health not only affects and improves anxiety, but can have a positive flow-on effect in so many different areas of a child's health and well-being. The other thing we want to be thinking about with anxiety is hormones. And I'm sure if you're a woman listening to this, you have noticed that you can feel more anxious at times like premenstrual times, for example, prior to your period, where your hormones are, your hormone levels are changing. So changes in hormones can have a massive impact on anxiety. Many women have experienced this as increased anxiety when they're premenstrual. As I said, anxiety is more prevalent around puberty for girls, which is really interesting, and boys may also experience anxiety that is triggered by puberty. So I've had personal experience with this with my 11-year-old daughter, and when puberty sort of started for her anxiety definitely became more prevalent. Estrogen and testosterone are the main sex hormones that trigger anxious feelings. So both low and high levels of both of these can affect mental health. So it's best to focus on balancing them out. There's no one way to do this. I can't sort of give you some general advice here, but just knowing that changes in hormones can trigger anxiety, and there are definitely things that we can do and help support you with as naturopathic practitioners here at Natural Super Kids, to help support your kids through those changes like puberty. There's certain nutrients and things that can be really supportive during this time. It's also important to remember that some kids are more sensitive to hormonal changes even prior to puberty. So if you do notice that your child is experiencing more anxiety as their body develops, hormones are a likely reason. So I think that's really good information to know. Also, nutrient levels. So nutrient deficiencies and nutrient insufficiencies, which are not quite deficiencies, but, we don't have optimum levels of nutrients when we have nutrient insufficiencies. So these are common factors for anxiety in children. Often these are not picked up by a doctor or a medical professional, but correcting them can have a really big impact on the symptoms of anxiety. Magnesium is my first go-to nutrient for kids with anxiety and adults with anxiety as well. So magnesium balances out the stress response and reduces symptoms of anxiety. It can also help with things like sleep, muscle health, and energy. Magnesium deficiency is really common, unfortunately, because our soils are low in magnesium, meaning that the food that grows in those soils is depleted of magnesium as well. So it's a really good nutrient to think about supplementing with. Another nutrient to consider for anxiety is omega-3 fatty acids. The majority of kids don't eat enough omega-3s in their diet through fish and seafood. Nuts and seeds have some omega-3s, but the form of omega-3 in plants needs to be converted before the body can use it. So if you can try and get 2 to 3 serves of fish or seafood into your child each week, that is really where where the optimal levels of intake of omega-3 is. If you can't do that, which even I don't do that consistently, you might want to think about an omega-3 supplement for your child, particularly if they have anxiety. It can make really a big difference to overall mood, brain health, neurological health, and more. Some other nutrients to think about for anxiety are B vitamins, including folate, vitamin B12, and vitamin B6. They act as cofactors for brain chemicals, so low levels can cause imbalances. These vitamins are water soluble, so the body can't build up a store of them. So kids need to be consuming them daily. And B vitamins are contained in a whole range of, whole foods. But because our kids are eating less of the healthy whole foods and more of the processed refined foods, many kids do become deficient in B vitamins. And if you look at a good quality multivitamin for kids that contains some B vitamins, maybe a little bit of magnesium, that can be a really great start. Vitamin D and iron can also contribute to anxiety, deficiencies of iron and vitamin D. So it really is best to consult individually with a naturopath for advice on which supplements are going to be best for your child. But there's some food for thought in terms of nutrients. Stress, of course, is another big factor when it comes to contributing to anxiety. So stress can increase the level of the stress hormone cortisol, which I mentioned before. Over time, chronically elevated cortisol can lead to anxiety symptoms. So getting some support for managing stress can be a really good idea, and thinking about, how loaded up are our kids' schedules, because they're becoming busier and busier. It's really great for our kids to have some white space and some time where they don't have scheduled activities, but they're also not on their screens. They're the times when kids are going to be complaining that they're bored, but that is actually really a good thing. Our kids are used to constant stimulation. They're at school, they're at, sport or dance or music lessons or whatever it is that each individual child does. And then when they're home, they're tired, so they're watching TV or they're on YouTube or they're playing a game on their computer, something like that. So their brains don't have that time to rest. It's really lacking in kids these days. So if we can try and build in some more, just downtime for our kids where they're off their screens, that can really help to manage stress levels in kids. I also wanted to mention a disorder called pyrrole disorder. Again, I will link to an article in the show notes to explain more about this, because this could really be an episode on its own, and maybe I will do an episode on pyrroles at some point in the future. But pyrrole disorder is an imbalance that can lead to anxiety. So when pyrrole levels are high, they cause the body to excrete zinc and B6, and these nutrients are essential for brain chemicals such as dopamine and serotonin, those really important neurotransmitters. So pyrrole disorder can lead to an imbalance in these neurotransmitters, and that can lead to symptoms of anxiety. So I have found over the years of consulting that pyrrole disorder is a very common cause of anxiety in kids. And you can get tested for pyrrole disorder through a urine test, and you can work with a practitioner that can, help to interpret those test results and come up with a personalized plan for your child. Because, you do really want to get the levels right for kids with pyrrole disorder. So have a look in the show notes at my article on pyrroles if you want to know more about that. So they're really the common kind of underlying factors, drivers, causes, and things that can lead to anxiety in children, some of the most common ones. There's others, of course, as well. So now I want to talk about some handy tips for addressing anxiety in children. And these are both, from my naturopathic vault that I use, but also from personal experience with my daughter. And just to be clear, she's never been diagnosed with anxiety. We did go and see a child psychologist once who we weren't very impressed with, and things sort of naturally started to improve since then. So she's never had a diagnosis, but she's had definitely times which have been really challenging in terms of managing that anxiety, her not wanting to kind of leave the house, go to school, go to sleepovers, even though she has wanted to. Her anxiety has kind of held her back or made these sort of situations really challenging. So first of all, I just want to say that things like mindfulness, breathing techniques can work really well for kids in the moment of having anxiety, but it can be hard for them to participate and want to kind of take part in these sorts of things. So a couple of things we found really helpful is just sort of touching the tip of each finger with one other finger and just counting slowly. So it's really all about getting them out of their worry brain and just, into just the present moment. Don't worry about what's happening in a few minutes' time when we get to school. Like, let's just focus on now. So yeah, literally just counting fingers over and over again, nice and slowly. Breathing, like box breathing, so drawing a box in the air and going sort of breathing in as you go up and then holding as you go across and then breathing out as you go down and then holding as you go back across. So they're literally just drawing a box or a square in the air. So you can do this anywhere you are. And just really, it just brings them back to their breath. In the moment, if anxiety is really sort of, exacerbated at that moment, it can be really hard to even get kids to do these things. So it's much more effective if you can get them before, they've reached that peak of their anxiety. But those kind of mindfulness breathing techniques, another thing that was really helpful for us is, if we're driving along and or wherever we are and the anxiety starts to kick in, we start to be in the present moment by looking around and seeing what we can see, hear, feel, those sorts of things. So to bring that down to like a child's level, tell me 3 things you can see right now. And now tell me 3 things that you can hear. It might be the engine of the car and the birds in the birds out the window and your voice. So it's basic things and, somewhere between 2 and 5 things that you can see, that you can hear, that you can feel. You can feel your T-shirt on your skin. You can feel your hands rubbing together. You can feel the ground underneath your feet. So those sorts of things, giving them some examples can really help. Another thing that's worked really well for us, this was quite a few years ago, was having a worry tree. So we just drew, and my sister, who is a counsellor, I will link her in the show notes as well because she does online sessions and has a lot of experience with anxiety in kids. So she came over and she drew up this big worry tree on a big piece of paper and stuck it on the wall. And then we just made these little tags, and every night before bed, about an hour before bed, so not directly before bed, she would just write down on these tags things that she was worried about, and she would stick them on the tree. And then the idea is that the tree's going to look after those worries. So you don't have to worry about those worries until the morning, because often, all this worry can be exacerbated at night. And then in the morning, you take off any of the worries that you're not worried about anymore, which is generally most of them, and you leave the other ones up there. So the worry tree is going to look after them. And it's just really a way that they can get their worries out. And for little kids, they can just draw pictures. So that worked, really well for us as well, because kids don't always even know what they're worried about. But even if they're just drawing scribbles and popping it on the worry tree, it's that idea that you're getting your worries out for the tree to look after. So that one worked really well for us as well. In terms of naturopathically, it's really great to get some advice and support from a practitioner, and we can definitely help with that here at Natural Super Kids. I'll pop the link where you can book an online appointment to get started with this and check out all the details. But I do want to give you some practical tips to get started with. So the first thing is, cleaning up your child's diet. So we know from research that a Western style diet that consists of processed food and refined food increases the risk of anxiety. So to start with, focus on reducing your child's intake of things like sugar, processed carbohydrates and additives. These things can really have the biggest bang for their buck in terms of, removing those from the diet or reducing those in the diet. And then we want to add in the nutrient-rich foods, like a traditional diet with plenty of fruits and vegetables and protein and whole grains. We know a diet like this can be protective against anxiety. So you want to focus on adding plenty of whole foods into the diet, particularly those that are rich in things like magnesium and omega-3 and zinc and B vitamins and vitamin D. These are all really important nutrients. So switching away from packet food to more whole foods can make a really big difference. And we've talked about this in on the podcast previously. We have some recipes to get you started on the Natural Super Kids website. And if you're a club member, of course, you've got access to a lot of great whole food recipes that are easy for you to make, easy and quick to make. So it doesn't have to be difficult. It's also a good idea if your child has ongoing anxiety to look at testing for things like MTHFR and pyrrole disorder. And we can definitely help with that, or you want to really be working with a practitioner to do that sort of testing so that you can get the results interpreted, really well. Working with a counsellor or a psychologist is a great idea as well. This can really help kids to identify their feelings and develop strategies to deal with anxiety. And, take them through simple practices like mindfulness and breath work, which work really well for kids. So looking for someone great that, has experience with kids is a really good idea. And like I said, I will pop a link to my sister Emma's website because she does offer consults over Skype and she has extensive experience working with kids. So it's really about getting that diet right, addressing some of the underlying causes that could be going on for your child, and looking at some of those nutrients that I mentioned as well can be really helpful, but getting that support from a psychologist or a counsellor is really great, as a really great idea as well. So there was a lot in that episode. I hope it was helpful for giving you some things you might not have thought about for your child's anxiety before, and really important to just give your child lots of love and lots of connection when they are, suffering with anxiety, which can be hard because I know firsthand how exhausting it is to be going through that challenge with your child. You end up feeling really depleted and exhausted as well. So take the pressure off yourself and, give your child as much sort of love and connection as you can through these challenging times with anxiety. Thank you so much for listening today. I will pop the links that I've mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. So come on over and have a look at those if you want to know more. And I'll be back with a new podcast episode next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.